The kiss happened before either of them even knew the other's name. The rain had turned the narrow Soul Street into a mirror of shattered lights. Sirens echoed in the distance. Black SUVs blocked both ends of the alley while frightened pedestrians disappeared into nearby shops. A young woman carrying a paper bag of groceries froze when she saw a tall man collapse against a brick wall. Blood stained his expensive black suit. His breathing was shallow. His eyes were already beginning to close. Every instinct told her to run. Instead, she stepped toward him. "Please," the stranger whispered before losing consciousness. She knelt beside him, ignoring the growing sound of engines. His pulse was weak. She remembered a first aid class she'd taken years ago while volunteering at a community center. His airway seemed blocked. She tilted his head back, checked for breathing, and realized he had almost stopped. Without thinking twice, she pressed her lips against his and gave him rescue breaths. 1, 2, 3. Then he gasped. At that exact moment, dozens of armed men stormed into the alley. "Guns down!" one shouted. The young woman raised her trembling hands, certain she was about to die. Instead, every weapon lowered. One of the men stared at the unconscious stranger before speaking with visible relief. "The chairman is alive." She blinked. Chairman? The injured man wasn't just anyone. He was Kang Min-jae, a name whispered across South Korea with equal parts fear and respect. Some called him a billionaire. Others called him the invisible king of the Korean underworld. Most simply called him the Korean Mafia Boss. Her heart nearly stopped. She had just kissed the most dangerous man in the country, not out of love, not for money, simply to save his life. Within seconds, black-suited bodyguards surrounded them. A doctor rushed forward, checking Min-jae's condition while another man questioned the young woman. "What did you do?" I only gave him CPR. "You touched him?" "I was trying to save him," the doctor suddenly interrupted. "She's telling the truth." He looked toward the security chief. If she hadn't cleared his airway and given rescue breaths, he wouldn't have survived until we arrived. Silence spread across the alley. Every guard looked at the young woman differently now. Not as a suspect, but as the stranger who had saved their leader's life. Her name was Emily Carter, 26 years old, an American kindergarten teacher who had moved to Seoul 6 months earlier after accepting a cultural exchange program. She barely spoke Korean. She had no family nearby. She rented a tiny apartment above an old bakery. She spent weekends helping elderly neighbors carry groceries and teaching English to children for free. She had absolutely no idea that fate had just rewritten her future. One of the guards handed her a business card made of solid black metal. "Our chairman will want to thank you." Emily shook her head immediately. "I don't need anything." The guard looked genuinely confused. "You saved the life of the most powerful man in Korea." "I didn't know who he was." "You do now." She smiled nervously. "I'd still do it again." For the first time that evening, every hardened bodyguard fell completely silent. No one had spoken to Kang Min-jae without expecting something in return. Money, protection, power favors. But this foreign woman wanted nothing. Hours later, inside one of Seoul's most secure private hospitals, Kang Min-jae slowly opened his eyes. His first words surprised everyone. "Who saved me?" "The American woman. Bring her." "She already left." His dark eyes narrowed. "She refused the reward." That answer confused him more than the attack itself. Everyone wanted something from Kang Min-jae, everyone. Except the woman who had literally breathed life back into him. For the next several days, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He reviewed security footage from nearby buildings. He watched the recording of her kneeling beside him. She never checked his watch, never searched his pockets, never looked around to see who was watching. She simply tried to save a stranger. That kind of person almost didn't exist in his world. Meanwhile, Emily returned to her ordinary life. She taught children how to paint butterflies. She laughed when they mispronounced English words. She shared homemade cookies with lonely elderly neighbors. She never told anyone about the man she'd rescued. She assumed she'd never see him again. She was wrong. One rainy afternoon, she noticed an elderly street vendor struggling to lift heavy boxes outside his small flower shop. Emily immediately set down her umbrella and helped him without hesitation. As they worked together, a sleek black car stopped across the street. Inside sat Kang Min-jae. His driver spoke quietly. "Should we continue, Chairman?" Min-jae didn't answer. He simply watched. Emily laughed with the old vendor, as though they had been family for years. Before leaving, she secretly paid for several bouquets that hadn't sold all week. She told the old man they were beautiful, even though no customers had come. His eyes filled with grateful tears. Min-jae noticed everything. No cameras, no audience, no expectation of praise. She was exactly the same when no one was watching. That realization disturbed him in ways violence never had. His entire empire had been built on loyalty purchased through fear or wealth. Emily's kindness couldn't be bought at all. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed again and again, always by coincidence. Or so Emily believed. She would help a lost child find his parents. Min-jae happened to witness it. She would comfort a crying woman at a subway station. He saw that too. She bought lunch for a homeless veteran during winter. Agon, he watched from a distance. The world's most feared mafia boss found himself secretly following the daily routine of the world's most ordinary woman, not because he doubted her, because he couldn't understand her. One evening, he finally stepped out of the shadows. Emily had just finished tutoring students when she noticed the familiar black car parked outside. The tall man she had saved weeks earlier stood beside it, wearing a charcoal overcoat. Healthy, calm, intimidating, yet strangely grateful. "You saved my life." Emily smiled awkwardly. "I'm glad you're okay. You knew who I was afterward." "Yes." "And you weren't afraid?" "I was terrified." He almost smiled. "Then why didn't you accept my reward?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because saving someone shouldn't come with a price." Those words hit him harder than any bullet ever had. For years, everyone around Kang Min-jae had treated compassion as weakness. Emily treated it as the most natural thing in the world. He looked into her eyes. There was no fear anymore, no greed, no admiration. She simply saw another human being standing in front of her. For perhaps the first time in his entire adult life, someone wasn't looking at the mafia boss. They were looking at the man. Kang Min-jae had built an empire where trust was measured in contracts, blood, and silence. Yet one ordinary conversation with Emily Carter left him questioning everything he believed about people. As she prepared to walk away, he spoke again. "At least allow me to drive you home." Emily hesitated before nodding, not because of the luxury car waiting beside him, but because she noticed how exhausted he looked beneath his calm expression. During the drive, there was no talk of his wealth or influence. Instead, he asked why she had moved to Seoul. Emily explained that after losing both of her parents in a car accident years earlier, she had promised herself to spend her life helping children wherever she could. Teaching overseas had always been her dream. Min-jae listened quietly, surprised that she spoke of tragedy without bitterness. When the car stopped outside her small apartment above the old bakery, he stared at the aging building in disbelief. The woman who had saved one of the richest men in Asia lived in a place smaller than one of his guest rooms. Before leaving, she thanked the driver, thanked Min-jae for the ride, and disappeared upstairs without asking for anything. The following morning, Min-jae instructed his assistant to investigate Emily, expecting to discover hidden debts, secret ambitions, or connections to rival organizations. Instead, the report stunned everyone in the room. She donated part of her modest salary every month to an orphanage back in America. She spent weekends teaching English for free at a local community center. She regularly visited lonely elderly residents whose own families rarely came to see them. She had no criminal record, no scandals, no social media obsession, and no wealthy friends. "She's ordinary," the assistant said carefully. Min-jae closed the file. No, he replied. She's extraordinary. While Min Jae quietly observed her life, danger was already moving in the shadows. The men responsible for the assassination attempt had failed once, but failure only made them more desperate. Their leader, Park Do-hyun, another powerful crime boss, reviewed surveillance footage from the alley where Min Jae had survived. He noticed Emily kneeling beside him. "Who is she?" he asked. "An American teacher," one of his men answered. Park smiled coldly. "Then she is now the chairman's weakness." His order was simple. "Watch her. Don't touch her. Not yet." Meanwhile, Emily remained completely unaware that armed men had begun following her every move. She continued living exactly as before. One afternoon, while shopping at a neighborhood market, she noticed a little boy crying because he had lost his mother. She knelt beside him, wiped away his tears, and stayed with him until his panicked mother returned minutes later. Nearby, hidden among shoppers, two of Park's men watched the scene. "Boss says she's important," one whispered. "She looks like a kindergarten teacher." "Exactly. That's why no one will expect what's coming." That evening, Min Jae received an urgent security report. Emily had been under surveillance for 3 consecutive days. His expression darkened instantly. "Increase protection." "Without her knowing?" his chief asked. "Especially without her knowing." From that day forward, elite bodyguards watched over Emily from a distance. They disguised themselves as delivery drivers, office workers, taxi passengers, and cafe customers. Emily never noticed that every dangerous situation mysteriously resolved itself before reaching her. A speeding motorcycle that nearly hit her was intercepted by an unmarked SUV. A suspicious stranger suddenly changed direction after spotting one of Min Jae's hidden guards. A pickpocket attempting to steal her purse disappeared before getting close. She believed she was simply lucky. Min Jae knew better. Days later, Emily volunteered at a charity fundraiser for sick children. As she painted butterflies on children's faces, a little girl asked her, "Miss Emily, are you a princess?" Emily laughed softly. "No." "Then why are you always smiling?" Emily paused before answering, "Because smiles are free, and sometimes they're exactly what someone needs." Standing across the room in a tailored black suit, Min Jae heard every word. He had attended the fundraiser anonymously after making the largest donation in its history, yet no one recognized him. He watched children run toward Emily as if she carried sunlight wherever she went. He had seen presidents, billionaires, celebrities, and generals fight for his attention, but these children surrounded Emily with genuine love, expecting nothing except another smile. For reasons he couldn't explain, he suddenly envied her more than anyone he had ever met. That night, as he returned to his penthouse overlooking Seoul, he stood alone before the massive glass windows. The city stretched endlessly beneath him, glowing with wealth and power. Yet despite owning half the skyline, he felt strangely empty. Emily, with almost nothing, seemed richer than he had ever been. His thoughts were interrupted by an emergency call. One of his security teams had intercepted encrypted communications from Park Do-hyun's organization. The message contained only 6 chilling words. "Take the American woman alive tomorrow." Min Jae slowly lowered the phone. His eyes became ice cold. The kindness that had saved his life had now placed Emily directly in the crosshairs of the deadliest enemies he had ever faced. The next morning began like every other morning for Emily Carter. She woke before sunrise, watered the small flowers on her windowsill, thanked the elderly baker downstairs for a fresh loaf of bread, and walked toward the kindergarten with a cheerful smile. She had no idea that more than 20 highly trained bodyguards were secretly watching every street around her, while another group of armed men prepared to kidnap her before noon. Inside a black SUV parked across the road, Min Jae's security chief received an urgent message through his earpiece. 3 hostile vehicles approaching from the east. His face tightened. "Chairman, they're making their move." Miles away, Kang Min-jae immediately stood from a meeting with international investors. Without a single word of explanation, he left the conference room, climbed into his armored vehicle, and ordered the driver, "Get me to Emily. Now, back near the school, Emily finished helping children decorate paper stars for an upcoming festival. As classes ended, she waved goodbye to the students and began walking toward a nearby cafe where she planned to grade homework. She noticed a black van parked beside the sidewalk but thought nothing of it. Suddenly, the side door slid open. Two masked men rushed toward her. Before Emily could scream, another van crashed into the kidnapper's vehicle with incredible force. Hidden bodyguards appeared from every direction as if they had materialized out of thin air. The peaceful street instantly exploded into chaos. People ran for cover while the sound of shattering glass echoed through the neighborhood. Emily stood frozen in shock as one of the attackers grabbed her arm. Before he could drag her away, a bodyguard tackled him to the ground. Another kidnapper reached for a weapon, but a precise kick sent it flying across the pavement. Within seconds, the quiet street had become a battlefield. Then a familiar black sedan stopped in the middle of the road. The rear door opened, and Kang Min-jae stepped out. His presence alone seemed to change the atmosphere. Even the attackers hesitated. He walked directly toward Emily without taking his eyes off the men surrounding her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She could barely speak. "What's happening?" Before he could answer, a gunshot shattered the silence. Everyone turned as a sniper's bullet struck the hood of Min-jae's car, missing him by inches. His bodyguards immediately formed a protective circle around him and Emily. More shots followed, sending civilians screaming into nearby buildings. Min-jae pulled Emily behind a concrete pillar as bullets ricocheted around them. Emily's hands trembled uncontrollably. This wasn't something from a movie anymore. This was real. She looked at Min-jae with frightened eyes. "They're trying to kill you." He shook his head. "Not today." Another explosion rocked the street as one of the attackers' vehicles burst into flames. Smoke filled the air. Through the chaos, Min-jae noticed a second group of armed men approaching from the opposite direction. It was a trap. Park Do-hyun had planned everything perfectly. The kidnapping had only been bait to lure Min-jae into the open. Emily suddenly realized something horrifying. "They're here because of me." Min-jae looked directly into her eyes. "No. They're here because of me." He reached into his jacket, removed a small communication device, and calmly gave an order. Operation Black Shield. Protect Miss Carter at all costs. Moments later, black helicopters appeared overhead. Armored vehicles blocked every exit from the street while dozens of elite security officers flooded the area. The attackers quickly realized they had underestimated Min-jae's preparations. A fierce firefight erupted as Park's men attempted to escape, but one by one they were captured or forced to retreat. Within minutes, the street fell silent except for distant sirens and the crackling sound of burning vehicles. Emily stood in complete disbelief. She had gone from teaching children about kindness that morning to surviving an organized crime ambush before lunch. As emergency crews secured the area, Min-jae removed his suit jacket and gently placed it over Emily's shoulders. She looked at him with tears beginning to form. "You knew this could happen, didn't you?" He didn't deny it. "I hoped I was wrong. You've been protecting me this whole time." He nodded once. Emily struggled to process everything. "Why?" Kang Min-jae answered with quiet honesty. Something almost no one had ever heard from him. "Because the woman who saved my life deserves to keep hers." Before Emily could respond, one of the captured attackers laughed despite being handcuffed. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth as he looked directly at Min-jae. "You can save her today," he said with a cruel smile. "But our boss already knows the truth. The kiss that saved your life connected your destinies forever, and now everyone in the underworld knows exactly who she is." Emily felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The attacker's words echoed over and over inside her mind, "Connected your destinies forever." She looked around at the wrecked street, shattered windows, overturned vehicles, and frightened people being escorted away by emergency responders. Only hours earlier, her biggest concern had been preparing tomorrow's lesson for her kindergarten class. Now she had become a target in a war she never knew existed. Min Jae noticed the fear in her eyes and quietly led her toward his armored vehicle. "You're coming with me," he said. Emily immediately shook her head. "No, my students, my apartment, my life. If you go back there today, they will kill you." His voice remained calm, but there was no room for argument. Emily realized he wasn't trying to control her. He was trying to keep her alive. Reluctantly, she entered the vehicle. As the convoy pulled away, she watched police cars and ambulances fill the street until everything disappeared behind tinted windows. They drove through private gates into an enormous mountain estate surrounded by forests, cameras, and layers of security, unlike anything Emily had ever imagined. The mansion looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Guards stood at every entrance, while surveillance drones quietly circled overhead. Inside, the elegance was breathtaking, but the silence felt lonely. A housekeeper welcomed Emily warmly and showed her to a spacious guest suite, larger than her entire apartment. Fresh clothes had already been prepared in her size, along with books, flowers, and a handwritten note that simply read, "You are safe here." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. She wasn't a prisoner, yet she couldn't leave. She wasn't family, yet everyone treated her with remarkable respect. Downstairs, Min Jae gathered his most trusted advisors. A digital map of Seoul glowed across the conference table as intelligence reports continued arriving every minute. "Park Do-hyun has declared open war," his security chief announced. "Several allied organizations have already switched sides after hearing you risked everything to protect the American woman." Another advisor looked concerned. "Many believe she is more important to you than your own empire." The room fell silent. Min Jae finally spoke. "Then let them believe it." Every advisor exchanged surprised glances. For years, their chairman had hidden every personal emotion because enemies exploited weakness without mercy. Yet today, he had protected Emily in broad daylight before hundreds of witnesses. The rumors spreading through the criminal underworld would be impossible to stop. Upstairs, Emily wandered through the mansion, unable to relax. She eventually discovered a quiet library filled with thousands of books. To her surprise, Min Jae was already there, standing beside a window with a cup of tea. He looked less like a feared mafia boss and more like a lonely man carrying invisible burdens. "I didn't know you liked books," Emily said softly. He smiled faintly. "Books don't betray you." She walked closer. "People have?" He gave a short laugh without humor. "Almost everyone." Emily looked at the shelves before pulling out an old children's storybook, written in both Korean and English. "My father used to read stories to me every night," she said. "He believed every child deserved hope before going to sleep." Min Jae quietly admitted, "I don't remember anyone reading to me." Emily turned toward him, surprised. "Not even when you were little?" He slowly shook his head. "By the time I was 8, I had already learned that surviving was more important than dreaming." For the first time since meeting him, Emily saw past the expensive suits, bodyguards, and reputation. Beneath it all was a boy who had grown up surrounded by fear instead of love. Before she could respond, alarms suddenly echoed throughout the mansion. Red emergency lights flashed across the hallways. Guards rushed into position with weapons drawn. The security chief burst into the library. "Chairman, we've captured an encrypted transmission." Min Jae's expression hardened instantly. "Report. It's from Park Do-hyun." The chief handed him a tablet, displaying a single chilling message. "You can hide the woman inside your fortress, but before sunrise, someone you trust will open the gate for us." A traitor was inside the mansion, and for the first time since Emily had entered the estate, the safest place in Korea no longer felt safe at all. The message changed everything. Every guard, servant, driver, and advisor inside the estate instantly became a possible suspect. The fortress that had seemed impossible to penetrate now felt like a trap waiting to close. Min Jae calmly handed the tablet back to his security chief, but everyone in the room recognized the dangerous silence that followed. Whenever Kang Min Jae became this quiet, decisive action always came next. "Seal every entrance," he ordered. "No one leaves. No one enters. Everyone is investigated." Within minutes, the entire mansion was placed under lockdown. Electronic gates slammed shut, security scanners activated, and every employee surrendered their phones for inspection. Emily watched the organized chaos unfold with growing unease. She had never imagined living in a place where betrayal was expected instead of feared. A housekeeper noticed her worried expression and whispered kindly, "Please don't blame yourself, Miss Carter. The chairman has faced enemies his entire life. You're simply seeing the world he has always lived in." Those words stayed with Emily. She realized that while today's violence had shattered her peaceful routine, it was only another ordinary day for Min Jae. That evening, the mansion grew unusually quiet. Dinner was unnerved, but almost no one ate. Guards rotated positions every 15 minutes while surveillance teams searched every camera feed for anything suspicious. Emily found Min Jae standing alone on a balcony overlooking the dark mountains. "You should get some rest," she said gently. He smiled without turning around. "Rest is a luxury my enemies don't allow." She stepped beside him. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself." For a long moment, he remained silent. Then he admitted something he had never confessed to anyone. "The people closest to me have betrayed me before. Friends, business partners, even relatives. When you expect betrayal long enough, you stop believing loyalty exists." Emily looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe loyalty isn't something you buy or demand. Maybe it's something you earn." Her words lingered in the cool night air. Before Min Jae could answer, a loud explosion echoed from the eastern side of the estate. Emergency lights flooded the grounds as guards sprinted toward the perimeter. "Diversion!" the security chief shouted through the communication system. "Everyone stay in defensive positions." While dozens of guards rushed toward the explosion, a single masked figure slipped unnoticed through an underground maintenance tunnel beneath the mansion. The intruder carried no rifle, only a silenced pistol and a small electronic device capable of disabling interior security locks. Someone inside had already provided the access codes. The warning had been true. A traitor existed. Emily and Min Jae were quickly escorted into a reinforced security wing, but halfway through the corridor, the lights suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the hallway. A second later, emergency generators activated, casting the corridor in dim red light. One of the guards reached for his radio. Nothing. The communication system had been jammed. Then came the sound of slow footsteps. Everyone turned toward the end of the hallway. A familiar security officer emerged from the shadows with his weapon lowered. It was Captain Han, one of Min Jae's most trusted protectors for nearly 12 years. "Chairman," he said calmly, "I'm sorry." Before anyone could react, he pointed his pistol directly at Min Jae. Emily froze in disbelief. This was the man who had welcomed her into the mansion, smiled politely every morning, and assured her she was safe. Min Jae looked at him with quiet disappointment rather than anger. "How much did Park pay you?" Captain Han's eyes filled with regret. "Enough to save my daughter's life. She needs a surgery I could never afford." Emily's heart sank. This wasn't simple greed. It was desperation. Tears formed in Han's eyes as his hands trembled around the pistol. "I never wanted to betray you, but they promised she would live." Before Min Jae could respond, another voice echoed through the corridor. "Touch the trigger, and your daughter dies anyway." Everyone looked toward the entrance. Park Do-hyun himself stepped into the hallway, surrounded by heavily armed mercenaries, smiling as though he had already won. His trap had worked perfectly. He had turned one desperate father into a key that unlocked the strongest fortress in Korea. And now, for the first time since the alley where Emily had saved Min Jae's life, the ruthless crime boss stood face to face with his greatest enemy. Park Do-hyun walked forward with the confidence of a man who believed victory was already his. His tailored gray coat was untouched by the rain outside, and the cold smile on his face never wavered. Behind him stood more than 20 heavily armed mercenaries, their weapons trained on Kong Min Jae and everyone beside him. Captain Han lowered his head in shame, realizing too late that Park had never intended to keep his promise. "You lied," Han whispered. Park laughed softly. "Of course I lied. Men who betray once can never be trusted again." Before anyone could react, one of Park's mercenaries shot Captain Han in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the floor. Emily gasped and instinctively rushed toward the wounded man despite the danger. She pressed her hands against his bleeding wound, trying to slow the blood loss. Even after his betrayal, she refused to let him die. Park watched the scene with amusement. "There she is," he said, "the woman who saves everyone." Emily ignored him completely, focusing only on keeping Han conscious. Min-jae noticed every movement. Even now, surrounded by enemies, Emily's first instinct was compassion instead of fear. It reminded him once again of the rainy alley where she had saved a stranger without knowing his name. Park finally looked directly at Min-jae. "You've changed. Years ago, you would have sacrificed anyone to protect your empire. Today, you're risking everything for one woman." Min-jae answered calmly. "You're wrong. I'm protecting the only person in this room who still believes human lives are worth saving." Park shook his head. "Kindness is weakness." Emily looked up while still helping Captain Han. "No," she said firmly. "Kindness is courage. Cruelty is easy." The hallway fell silent. Even Park's own men seemed surprised by her fearless response. Park's smile slowly disappeared. "Take her," he ordered. Two mercenaries advanced toward Emily, but before they could reach her, every light inside the mansion suddenly switched off again. This time, it wasn't the intruders. It was Min-jae's hidden emergency defense system. Thick steel barriers dropped from the ceiling, separating the hallway into sections. Automatic security doors slammed shut, trapping Park and half of his men inside while isolating the others. Chaos erupted instantly. Gunfire echoed through the mansion as Min-jae's elite guards launched a coordinated counterattack from concealed positions built into the walls years earlier. Park realized he had walked directly into a fortress designed for exactly this kind of invasion. Smoke grenades filled the corridor, making visibility almost impossible. Min-jae grabbed Emily's hand. "Stay close." Together, they moved through a hidden passage, known only to a handful of trusted people. Behind them, explosions and gunfire continued shaking the mansion. Emily's heart raced as they descended a narrow staircase beneath the estate. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the command bunker," Min-jae replied. "It's the safest place here." Before they reached the final door, they heard weak footsteps behind them. It was Captain Han, bleeding heavily but still following. He collapsed onto one knee and looked at Min-jae with tears in his eyes. "Chairman, I'm sorry. I failed you." Min-jae remained silent. Han reached into his pocket and handed him a small encrypted drive. "Everything. Park's bank accounts, safe houses, every corrupt official working for him. I copied it all before tonight. I knew he would betray me eventually." Emily immediately knelt beside Han again, trying to stop the bleeding. Han smiled faintly at her. "Even after what I did, you still tried to save me." Emily nodded. "Everyone deserves one chance to do the right thing." Han closed his eyes for a moment before speaking his final warning. "There's one more traitor, not in this house, in the government, someone far more powerful than Park." His breathing became weaker. "Don't trust." Before he could finish the sentence, a single suppressed gunshot echoed through the tunnel. Han's body went still. Emily turned in horror toward the darkness ahead. A lone figure stepped out holding a silenced pistol. It wasn't one of Park's mercenaries. It wasn't a member of Min-jae's organization either. The man calmly displayed an official government identification badge before slipping it back into his pocket. He smiled at Min-jae and said, "This is no longer a mafia war, Chairman. You've accidentally uncovered something much bigger." The man lowered his silenced pistol as if he had all the time in the world. His expensive suit carried no insignia except the government identification badge he had flashed for a single second. Emily's heart pounded. She had expected criminals, not officials. Min-jae slowly stepped in front of her, shielding her from the stranger. "Who are you?" he asked. The man smiled. Someone whose name doesn't appear in public records anymore. His eyes settled on the encrypted drive, still clutched in Min Jae's hand. Captain Han made a mistake. He collected evidence that was never meant to exist. Min Jae slipped the drive into his pocket. Then I suppose you won't be leaving with it. The stranger shrugged. That depends on how much blood you're willing to spill tonight. Without another word, hidden gunfire erupted from deeper inside the tunnel. Bullets struck the concrete walls as Min Jae pulled Emily behind a steel support column. His remaining bodyguards returned fire. While the mysterious government agents advanced with military precision, they weren't fighting like gang members. They moved like elite special forces. Emily covered her ears as the deafening echoes filled the underground passage. Suddenly, the emergency lights flickered back on, revealing a maintenance elevator only a few meters away. "Go," Min Jae shouted. Emily refused to move. "Not without you." For a brief moment, he looked at her in disbelief. Almost everyone he had ever known had abandoned him when danger appeared. Yet this ordinary teacher refused to run. One of his guards managed to activate the elevator, while another sacrificed himself by holding back the attackers, buying precious seconds for Min Jae and Emily to escape. The doors closed just as another volley of bullets slammed into the metal frame. The elevator descended rapidly into the deepest level of the estate, where the command bunker was hidden behind reinforced blast doors. Inside, giant digital screens displayed security footage from every corner of the mansion. The battle above was still raging, but Min Jae's forces had begun gaining the upper hand. His security chief appeared on one of the monitors, bruised but alive. "Chairman, Park Do-yoon has been captured. Most of his men have surrendered." Emily let out a breath of relief, believing the nightmare was finally ending. Then another alarm sounded. A technician stared at his monitor in horror. "Chairman, someone has accessed the encrypted drive remotely." Min Jae immediately removed it from his pocket. A timer had appeared on the screen. 30 seconds. 29. 28. "It's wiping itself," the technician shouted. Min Jae realized the drive had been designed to destroy its own contents if removed from a secure network. Years of evidence against powerful criminals and corrupt officials were disappearing before their eyes. Emily looked around desperately before noticing a secure terminal connected directly to the estate's isolated servers. "Can we copy it?" she asked. The technician shook his head. Not in time. Emily remembered something her father had once told her about staying calm during emergencies. She grabbed the drive, connected it to the terminal, and pressed the emergency backup function she had seen the technician use earlier. The system began transferring the files. 10%. 25. 40. The countdown continued. 15 seconds. 14. 13. Everyone watched in complete silence. At 98%, the drive erased itself forever. The screen went black. The technician quickly checked the backup server. His eyes widened. It worked. Every file had been saved. The room erupted with relieved laughter for the first time that night. Min Jae looked at Emily with quiet admiration. Once again, without violence or power, she had saved something priceless. Hours later, dawn finally broke over Seoul. Park Do-hyun was in custody. His criminal empire was collapsing, and the evidence copied from Captain Han's drive promised to expose corruption reaching far beyond the underworld. As emergency crews secured the estate, Min Jae and Emily stepped outside into the fresh morning air. The first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the mountains surrounding the mansion. Emily smiled softly. "It's finally over." Before Min Jae could answer, his phone vibrated. He read the message once, and all the color drained from his face. Emily noticed immediately. "What is it?" He slowly turned the screen toward her. It contained a single sentence from an unknown sender. Asterisk. "You stopped one organization, but the person who ordered your assassination is waiting for you in America." Emily stared at the message in stunned silence. America? Nothing about the past few weeks had prepared her for those words. She looked at Min Jae, searching his face for an explanation, but he appeared just as surprised. The anonymous sender had included no name, no location, and no demands, only a warning. Min-jae handed the phone to his intelligence chief. Trace it. The chief worked frantically for several minutes before lowering the device with a frustrated sigh. It vanished through dozens of encrypted networks. Whoever sent this wanted us to read it, not find them. Emily took a slow breath. I've never had enemies. I'm just a teacher. Min-jae looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe this isn't about who you are. Maybe it's about what you unknowingly became the night you saved my life. The investigation into Captain Han's recovered files continued for several weeks. The evidence destroyed Park Do-hyun's organization completely and exposed corrupt businessmen, politicians, and criminal financiers who had secretly worked together for years. One by one, arrests were made across the country. News channels called it one of the biggest organized crime crackdowns in modern history. Yet, despite the victories, investigators found nothing connecting Emily to America or explaining the mysterious message. It remained the only unanswered question. As life slowly returned to normal, Emily prepared to leave the estate. She insisted on returning to her students, saying they deserved a teacher who kept her promises. Min-jae didn't argue. Instead, he arranged discreet security that would protect her without interfering with her freedom. On her first day back at the kindergarten, the children rushed toward her with excited hugs, homemade drawings, and dozens of questions about where she had been. Emily laughed for the first time in weeks. Watching from a parked car across the street, Min-jae realized something important. No amount of wealth or power could create the genuine happiness he saw in that classroom. It had to be earned through kindness, patience, and love. Days later, he quietly visited the elderly flower vendor Emily had once helped. Without revealing his identity, he paid off the old man's debts and arranged for the shop to remain open for the rest of his life. He also anonymously funded scholarships for underprivileged children, expanded the community center where Emily volunteered, and donated to hospitals that treated families unable to afford medical care. When his advisors questioned these decisions, Min-jae gave a simple answer. Power that protects only itself is worthless. Emily eventually learned about the anonymous donations, but never discovered who had made them. She simply smiled, believing that kindness had inspired more kindness. One quiet evening, Min-jae visited the same narrow alley where their lives had first crossed. The rain had returned, washing away every trace of the violence that had once stained the pavement. Emily joined him after finishing work. They stood in silence, listening to the soft rhythm of falling rain. Everything changed here, Min-jae said quietly. Emily nodded. Not because of a kiss. He looked at her with curiosity. She smiled gently. Because one stranger chose to save another. He realized she was right. The rescue breaths that had brought him back to life had been an act of humanity, not romance. But that single moment had transformed them both. Emily had discovered a courage she never knew she possessed, while Min-jae had learned that true strength wasn't measured by fear, wealth, or influence. It was measured by the lives you chose to protect. He offered her a small envelope before leaving. Inside was the deed to a brand new children's learning center, built in her parents' memory, where every child could study free of charge. There was no signature, only a handwritten note, for the woman who reminded me what it means to be human. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she looked up, but Min-jae had already walked away into the rain. She watched him disappear with a peaceful smile, knowing neither of them would ever be the same person they had been before that unforgettable night. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed as the clouds slowly parted, and sunlight broke through the sky, marking not the end of a dangerous journey, but the beginning of two lives forever changed by one selfless act of compassion. Like, subscribe, and support my channel. I really need your support. If you enjoy my video, please share it and leave your feedback in the comments.